I want to welcome everybody, both in the United States and in Lithuania, and as Alex Weiser said, all places in between. It's a great pleasure to be able to present this event, which is a testament to both our ability to use modern technology and also to the international cooperation that the YIVO Institute has been able to achieve with institutions and with scholars and with the government of Lithuania. I express my deepest gratitude to those scholars, those institutional leaders, and those government officials who have welcomed YIVO, who have aided us in our work at recovering what really were the lost Jewish treasures of the YIVO Institute. I'm Jonathan Brent, and I'm Executive Director of the YIVO Institute, which was founded in Vilnius, in Vilna, in 1925. In 1940, the head of the YIVO Institute, Max Weinreich, managed to get to New York City, and the new headquarters of YIVO was established in New York. However, many thousands, hundreds of thousands of documents, thousands of books remained in Lithuania, hidden in various locations. And over the years, there has been a steady discovery of the materials that had once been part of the YIVO archive and library. And we are very grateful to the Martynas Mažvydas National Library of Lithuania for helping us in discovering these materials, for helping us digitize and conserve these materials and make them available to a world public through the Edward Blank YIVO Online Collections Project. Lara Lempertienė will say more about this later in the program. I want to thank very much the Consulate General of the Republic of Lithuania in New York, the Lithuanian Cultural Institute in Vilnius, and the Martynas Mažvydas National Library of Lithuania, also in Vilnius, for co-organizing today's event. Before we begin the reading of the programs of the poems of Avrom Sutzkever, I want to introduce Professor Dr. Renaldas Gudauskas, who is Director General of the Martynas Mažvydas National Library of Lithuania. Professor Gudauskas received his graduate diploma in Library and Information Sciences at Vilnius University. In St. Petersburg's Institute of Culture, he defended his doctoral dissertation in social sciences. Professor Gudauskas has been advisor for information and communication to the President of Lithuania, Vice Minister for Information and Informatics at the Ministry of Public Administration, an advisor to Prime Minister of Lithuania for Science, Education, and Information Society Development. Since 2010, Professor Gudauskas has been Director General of the Martynas Mažvydas National Library of Lithuania, developing the organization's core mission to ensure satisfaction of the Lithuanian Knowledge Society's needs for documentary and digital information. His important priorities are international cooperation, cultural heritage, digitization, and strategic projects. Currently, Professor Gudauskas is a board member of the Association of Bibliotheca Baltica. His main activity in the association is related to the cooperation of libraries of the Baltic region, project initiation, international library, and information policy making institutions. He is also the national representative of the UNESCO Information for All program, the European Science Foundation member of the Geosciences Center of Coimbra University, Portugal, and an expert at the Science Council of Lithuania. In 2012, he became a member of the Management Committee of the European Library, and in 2012 through 18, president of the Bibliotheca Baltica Association. Those are all of his official recognitions. I wish to say that he is also a friend, without whom our project, YIVO's project of digitizing and conserving the materials in Lithuania would probably not have happened. Professor Dr. Gudauskas is one of those figures, among others on this panel, who are dedicated to the democratic future of Lithuania and an open, free society of tolerance and critical thinking. Dr. Gudauskas.
Thank you, dear Jonathan. Thank you, dear Jonathan. Dear colleagues, dear audience of this broadcast, watching us from different continents. This event brought together those who are interested in Jewish literature, culture, and history, for whom the Lithuanian Jewish heritage is relevant and interesting. In recent years, the National Library of Lithuania has become one of the most important institutions that preserve the documentary heritage of Lithuanian Jews. Our library firmly follows the strategy to increase the dissemination of documentary heritage to strengthen the understanding of the society about the history of the ethnic communities of our country. Experts of the National Library, in cooperation with researchers of our country and foreign partners, carry out publishing projects for the dissemination of Jewish documentary heritage, and the book presented today is the first result of the project. The publishing partner for this book is the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research in New York. I sincerely thank our partners for that joint work. I'm sure that together we will continue this work. I also want to thank the colleagues from our library and partners, Mindaugas, Kvietkauskas, Sigutė Chlebinskaitė, for their input to this publication. Thank you for your kind attention.
Now I would like to introduce Dr. Mindaugas Kvietkauskas, who is a literary scholar, writer, and translator. Since the beginning of 2019, Professor Kvietkauskas has also served as Lithuania's Minister of Culture. As far as I know, he is the only Minister of Lithuanian Culture. Maybe there was one other who is also fluent in the Yiddish language. Before becoming a minister, Kvietkauskas worked at the Lithuanian Institute of Literature and Folklore in Vilnius for many years and managed the institution in 2008 through 2018. Kvietkauskas acquired a PhD at Vilnius University, studied Yiddish language, literature at the University of Oxford, Center for Hebrew and Judaic Studies. He has done internships at YIVO, as well as Yale University. His main areas of research are multinational literary modernism and urban culture in Lithuania and East Central Europe. Kvietkauskas is an author of 2 academic monographs, a collection of poetry, and a book of literary essays, Uosto Fuga, The Port Fugue. Kvietkauskas has translated several books from Polish and Yiddish, including works by Czesław Miłosz and Avrom Sutzkever. Recently, Kvietkauskas has translated the Vilnius Ghetto Diary, written by teenager Yitzhak Rudyszewski in 2018. The original manuscript of which is in the YIVO Institute in New York. He has compiled the Unlocked Diary about a young Jewish poet, Matilda Olkenaitė, and Hommage à Moi Vert, a publication accompanying the reprint of a photo album, The Ghetto Lane in Vilna, by Bauhaus-trained painter and photographer Moshe Raviv Borobiechik. The above-mentioned books were supplemented with introductory articles by Kvietkauskas, and it is a real pleasure to welcome him to this panel to read the poems of Sutzkever in Yiddish and Lithuanian and English.
Thank you, dear Jonathan. Dear participants, dear colleagues from YIVO, dear Justin, it's a real pleasure to meet with you all here. And as Jonathan Brent just said, I will start by reading a poem from this very special publication, a publication of a collection of poetry almost after 80 years from the time when it was prepared as a manuscript book in the Vilna Ghetto. This poem was composed on the same day that we are meeting today, the 23rd of November, 1942, in the Vilna Ghetto. And I will read it in Yiddish, then in English translation made by David Fishman, and then I will read my Lithuanian translation. It's a poem about a miracle. And the publication of this book is also a true miracle, the rescue of this manuscript from the Vilna Ghetto. So, Tfile zum Nes, bist do, bist lebendiger Kern, in teuter Schol verwickelt wie ein Ei. Bist do, und wirst da hilf mir wären, beschaß dich wird der Warmen mein Weh. Ich bin nackt auf den Frost und seh, ich warm, dein teuter Schol, der Barm sich, der Barm. Und du wirst doch sich Musenton an Effen und frei sein aus die Klammern von Wort. Wer dein Blick dämmelt sich mit meinem Treffen und bleiben hängen zwischen mir und Mord, und sich allein wirst du zum Nest beschweren, wie ist der Ich mit Warmkeit von Tränen. Es eilt der Teut auf Keulen scharfen Reiter, a durchzusifzen durch mein Gallsein Sam, a Rege, und ich lieg schon a Verbleiter, ob du wirst nicht verläufen, seiner Zam, verläuft dem Weg, a nicht wird dir verdrießen, weil euch a Ness muss hoben a Gewissen. Now, an English translation made by David Fishman, who was also a co-editor and co-translator of this book. A prayer to the miracle. You are here. You are here. You are a living seed wrapped like an egg inside its dead shell. You are here. You are here. You will help me in my need, and I will warm you with my pain. I am naked in the frost, yet I warm comfortably your dead shell. Have mercy, mercy. You will have to hatch and free yourself from the braces of the word, and then your glance with mine will meet and hang between me and murder. Make a miracle. you will yourself implore, as I do now, with the warmth of a tear. Death is rushing, riding on a bullet head to shoot its poison through my vein. One more second, and I'll be led. If you don't catch up, be a rain. Catch up. If not, you will lament. A miracle must also have a moral sense. And now, at least a stanza from a Lithuanian translation. Malda stebuklui. Čia tu, tikros gyvybės grūdas, tarsi trinys negyvame lukšte. Čia tu, padėsi man nežūti, jei ašarom sušildysiu tave. Aš nuogas šaltyje, bet šildau, pažiūrėk, aš tavo trapų lukštą. Pagailėk. So, as I have just told, the story of this book and this manuscript is also a miracle, perhaps a proof that finally a miracle had its mercy on the poet. The story of this manuscript and other manuscripts that were saved in the Vilna Ghetto, that were saved after the Second World War, can be told as a very rich detective story. It was also told by David Fishman in his book on the paper brigade that functioned in the Vilna Ghetto. It will be told this evening by Lara Lempertienė, who found a very special trove of manuscripts still hidden in the National Library of Lithuania. And Sutzkever's collection of poems, 10 poems, Tsen Lider in Yiddish, was one of the most special discoveries in that trove of manuscripts from the Vilna Ghetto. And I recall very vividly the moment when I was invited to the National Library, and Lara Lempertienė showed me Sutzkever's manuscripts and this special handmade notebook. Immediately the impression was that this is a discovery, a true discovery of a handmade poetry collection by Avrom Sutzkever that was made in the ghetto itself, and it had all characteristics of a manuscript book. It seemed from the very beginning when I saw it, it seemed as a book arranged according to a poetic concept, not just a draft of some poems, not just a collection of some particular texts. It is a special collection made by the poet for his audience in the Vilna Ghetto. It is made around a clear concept because all the 10 poems in this manuscript collection are united by one special feature. They are all dedications, dialogues, or prayers. They all address somebody, a person, a close person, a beloved person, a dead person, lost ones, or a metaphysical power, God or miracle. They are all conversations. It is a special example of a dialogical attitude towards the world where the dialogue between people is being destroyed. And because of that, it is a very strong example of cultural and poetical and spiritual resistance against the power that tries to break links, ties between people, between the community. We tried, together with a book designer, Sigutė Chlebinskaitė, to make this book as authentic as possible. This book presents the authentic photo images, high-resolution photo images of a manuscript itself. It's manuscript graphics, which is also a very special feature of this book. It renders the original Yiddish text as accurately as possible. And it also tells the story of this manuscript. In David Fishman's and my introductory articles, we describe the context, a very special context in which this manuscript was written. It's May 1943, an eve of a final destruction of the Vilna Ghetto, eve of the uprising of the Vilna Ghetto partisan organization, the FPO. And one can only perhaps guess and imagine the situation in which the poet composed this collection and probably left it as a possible testament. The existence of this collection was previously unknown. We know the fact that the first collection published by Sutzkever after the Holocaust was in 1945. It was his first collection, Die Festung, that appeared after the Holocaust. And now, after this discovery, it appeared that already in the Vilna Ghetto, Avrom Sutzkever made this manuscript poetry collection, and it changes his literary biography and makes it possible for us now to have a touch, an experience of poetry that was written in the very eye of the Holocaust tragedy in Vilna. Thank you so much.
Now I have tremendous pleasure in introducing a colleague and really the person who has held together the program that we've been collaborating on in Lithuania, Dr. Lara Lempertienė, who is the head of the Judaica Research Center at the Documentary Heritage Department in the National Library of Lithuania, and the curator of its Judaica collection. Her field of expertise is the cultural history of the European and Lithuanian Jewry. She is an author of numerous articles and an editor of several books. She is, moreover, a teacher, a great inspiration to a new generation of young scholars who have come to explore these treasures that she has helped to preserve and make public. So Lara, to you.
Thank you, dear Jonathan, for that kind introduction. And it is almost incredible to be in that surroundings among people who actually have no access to each other now in that condition. And now suddenly we do have a connection and we do have things to discuss together in that very, very warm and emotional surroundings. And I'm happy for that opportunity. Thank you. In the summer of 2017, a discovery was made at the National Library, which almost overnight changed the status of that institution, or maybe more correctly would be to say that added significantly to that status. The National Library, as a major memory institution in our country, was already for many years already known as a safekeeper of a huge, massive collection of Jewish materials, and I mean mainly published materials, books and periodicals. And on that materials, we collaborated for a couple of years, for a number of years, with the YIVO Institute and other institutions. But the discovery I have in mind, and what I mentioned, was a discovery of almost about 120,000 of pages of new documents, really manuscripts, photographs, playbills, and other kinds of documents that made the National Library as well a major archives of Jewish materials on the scale of our country and maybe even on the world scale. And of course, YIVO Institute as our faithful partner was almost immediately informed and excited as we were. And also YIVO tremendously helped us on initial stages of sorting and identifying these treasures by sending its experts. One of the first, or maybe the first expert, was Professor David Fishman, whom Mindaugas Kvietkauskas already mentioned. He spent here just several days the same summer, and it coincided with the final stages of his work on his already acclaimed monograph, The Book Smugglers, which was already mentioned, but when he came, we didn't know to what extent the coincidence will go. And I recall very vividly an episode of the last day of Professor Fishman's visit, actually last hours of his work at the library, when we decided to open just one more box. It would be the last box we would peruse together. In that box, the poetry of Avrom Sutzkever, the poetry written in the Vilna Ghetto, was found. Avrom Sutzkever, who was also one of the main heroes of David Fishman's book. And what was in that box, and after that several more boxes, as Mindaugas Kvietkauskas told already, there were all kinds of examples of Sutzkever's poetry work at Vilna Ghetto, drafts, fair copies, and several manuscript books, not one, several of them, practically, as was told, prepared to publication or to dissemination. And after the first avalanche of emotion has subsided, I truly can't say it subsided even now fully. I decided that we just can't have it all to ourselves, and only at the safety of the library shelves or archives shelves in the manuscript department. We have an obligation actually to share this treasure to the public. And after consultations with the colleagues in the library, and after securing Mindaugas Kvietkauskas' agreement as a renowned Yiddishist and translation of the works of Lithuanian Jewish authors from Yiddish into Lithuanian to collaborate on that project, we approached also the colleagues because of whom this discovery was made, and by whom the discovery was made. I mean the YIVO Institute and Professor Fishman. Luckily, not much persuasion was needed, because every one of us here in Vilnius and in New York understood an immense obligation, responsibility, and also importance of sharing this work of Sutzkever from the Vilna Ghetto with public. And not only because every work of such a great Yiddish poet, one of the greatest modern Yiddish poets, is very important. Every line of such poet, newly discovered line is important, but also because it is a testament to his indestructible human spirit and that special, almost unnatural creativity that manifested itself in the view of fear, danger, and everyday death in the horrific circumstances of Vilnius Ghetto. And my part in the project was very humble as a coordinator and compiler of the book, but I was very lucky and privileged to work with several people, with a team to whom I would like now to extend my deepest gratitude. It is, of course, the translators and the authors of articles, accompanying scientific articles, Mindaugas, Kvietkauskas, and David Fishman. It is the editor of the English part of the publication, Jonathan Brent. It is the book artist, Sigutė Chlebinskaitė, and also all the colleagues in Lithuanian National Library and in the YIVO Institute who actually supported the idea, and there are more of those people. They supported the idea and make the book Tsen Lider, 10 poems, Dešimt eilėraščių, became a reality. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lara. I wish now to introduce our last panelist, Justin Cammy, who will be the discussant for a conversation among the panelists. Justin is chair and associate professor of Jewish studies and world literatures at Smith College and a senior fellow of the Goldreich Institute for Yiddish at Tel Aviv University. He is author of the introduction to the full Pomegranate, a recent volume of Sutzkever poetry translated by Richard Fine. Cammy's own translation of Sutzkever's memoir, of the Vilna Ghetto, will appear with McGill Queen's University Press in 2021. Justin?
Thank you, Jonathan. And I can't tell you how pleased I am to join my distinguished colleagues in Lithuania. I was there, it seems like a world ago, a year and a half ago, speaking at that very library, and I can't wait to return to work with all of you. In my brief remarks today, I want to focus on 3 points that build upon what the Minister of Culture mentioned in his remarks: the materiality of this volume, the context of this manuscript, and the poetic logic of the collection. I think that we would be well served by thinking just for a moment about the materiality of this manuscript. What does it mean that it was handwritten by the author, reproduced for a future reader, and ostensibly hidden? And how does its hiddenness and now its discovery provide it with extra literary import, with the cultural authority of an artifact, or with aura, as Walter Benjamin might have suggested? I had the pleasure of seeing this text at the library in Lithuania, and the ability to feel the paper, to see the ink blots, to see how Sutzkever begins with a blue pen, but then has to change to a black pen where, assumedly, he runs out of ink. The paratext at the end of the manuscript with notes from something else that suggests that the paper was reused. The places where Sutzkever crosses out words, or the places where Sutzkever underlines certain words. These are all moments that one can't normally get in a reproduced volume. And in that sense, I think this manuscript performs itself. It's almost breathless in the way you see Sutzkever's writing. It isn't straight on the page, but angular. The Yiddish goes down. He doesn't have the chance necessarily to write in a straight way. It goes down the page to the right, as if done in a rush. The inside cover shows a title that is self-confident, a signature that is almost unreadable, and a title in Tsen Lider, 10 poems, in which you see a sharp angle for the lamed in a way to perform its own self-confidence. Now, to my second point, the context. Sutzkever dates this manuscript to May 1943. So we might want to ask, what is taking place beyond the editing and recopying of this volume in May 1943 in Sutzkever's life? So we know that Sutzkever is a member of the Paper Brigade, responsible for sorting books and archives as a slave laborer. We know that it's compiled and written at a moment when the FPO is in the advanced stages of making its plans for defending the ghetto. But what else might have been going on when Sutzkever was writing this out? Well, we know from his memoir that he was assigned to work at the train station in Vilnius in May 1943. And at that point, he was gathering materials that were being shipped from the Smolensk Museum. And along with the materials shipped from the Smolensk Museum were also children who were shipped. And he writes the following: 10 wagons stuffed with little children, ranging from the ages of 3 to 10, arrived with the museum contents. Each cart was guarded by a German who made sure that the little ones didn't escape. The conductor passed by and said that the children were being sent to Ponar. That's when the workers approached the Germans and asked, perhaps these children are for sale. Seeing the potential, the guards raised their price, 10 marks per child, 15 marks per child. And that's how things proceeded until the price finally settled at 30 marks per child. We managed to ransom almost all the children and save them from Ponar. When I later opened the crates, I discovered the diary of the valet to Peter the Great, ecclesiastical chronicles from the 15th and 16th centuries, and many other museum pieces. I brought a portion of these objects to the ghetto where I buried them. And I did so because I could not be certain that they would remain intact in the municipal archives. I hoped that they would be protected in at least one of these two locations. So we see from this brief memoiristic episode that he is both dealing with life and with objects at one and the same time, with the living future of the Jewish people, and at the same time with objects of museum quality that he then decides need to be preserved in the ground and buried to be protected for those very future generations that might outlive him. What else is going on in May 1943? Well, the first secret print shop is established with the help of the United Partisans organization. And on May 1st, 1943, Sutzkever remarks that there is a May Day celebration that takes place in the ghetto. And who attends that May Day celebration along with Sutzkever and the ghetto residents? None other than Lithuanian librarian Ona Šimaitė, who is also in the hall. She comes to the ghetto to participate in the celebrations as a sign of solidarity. So in the same way that we see the solidarity between the YIVO Institute and the Lithuanian National Library, we already have a precedent for that in the ghetto in terms of a Lithuanian librarian going to the ghetto in order to preserve what's going on. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about the logic of these selections. As the Minister of Culture noted, this is possibly the first edited volume of Sutzkever's ghetto poetry. It precedes both Die Festung of 1945 and Lieder vom Ghetto of 1946. And what's interesting is that those volumes that I just mentioned only include 1 and 3 poems respectively that appear in this volume. Of course, these poems then later appear in different form in his collected works, but they aren't included in the most immediate published works from 1945 and 1946 for the most part. It's also worth considering the fact that the poems appear out of chronological order in this manuscript. The earliest one is dated September 28th, 1942. The last one is dated April 6, 1943, but they aren't printed in this manuscript in chronological order, suggesting that they're organized by a different logic. And I think that that logic might be spoken of in terms of a range of moods. They range in moods from rage and frustration to prophecy. The first two poems perhaps begin and draw the reader in by focusing in on what he considered most important, namely culture. The first poem focuses on Yankov Gerstein and his death. Gerstein was the beloved teacher of music and also the director of the Vilna choir. The second poem is about the anniversary of the Ghetto Theater. And immediately after that, he then moves to the what I would call the core of the volume. It's philosophical poems that are highlighted by two different types of poems. One is about the creative process itself. We already heard a little bit about that in the poem A Prayer to the Miracle, with its incantatory, you are here, you are here. It almost anticipates what would be written in Kvietkauskas, one of his most famous chronicle poems, and in the poem that is called To My Wife. But then he has a totally different type of poems. The poems, And You Shall Speak to the Orphan, which has a series of questions and a command on how to answer those questions. Thus shall you speak to the orphan. If the orphan asks, who am I? Or if the orphan asks, what is my name? Or if the orphan asks, for whom? Sutzkever already provides guidance to that. So to the question, who am I? Who are you? He that perishes terminates the generations that ferment in him and await their redemption. Only you are left, so you are the air, a seed of holiness swinging in the wind, crumbled on a stony ravaged field, a small piece that is a diminutive whole. And he continues later, you are a wonder in a wonder and eternal, a small piece that is a diminutive whole. And then the volume continues with other questions. The question, how, which focuses on what one will think about in liberation. We now think of liberation as this ecstatic moment in Holocaust poetry. But if one goes back and reads how he talks about what one might think about on liberation, we see that it's a much darker, more philosophical rendering of that particular moment. And then perhaps the most painful poem in the entire volume, the poem Song for the Last, written in March 1943, that is not looking to sugarcoat the behavior of the Jews at all in the ghetto. In perhaps one of the most stunning lines of this entire volume, he talks about those who perhaps before the war and even during the war were more interested in the culture produced by others, in the languages produced by others, than in what Yiddish could produce itself. He writes at one point, the clear words of your language, meaning Yiddish, were illicit, and you licked the honeys of alien spit. Finally, the volume ends with two poems, one to his brother and the other Yehoash. And I think I want to spend one more minute just talking about the poem Yehoash, because here he brings the volume to a whole, moving from contemplation, anger, frustration to the transcendent power of Jewish creativity. Because Yehoash was not only the romantic Yiddish poet, but also the translator of the Hebrew Bible into Yiddish, so that poem ends with the following words in different orders: vision, redeemed rejoicing, jubilant people, and prophecy. The last line concluding, death itself is frightened by the beauty and pushes away its filthy, smoking cauldron. So we will never know how this volume was, where this volume was buried and how it was necessarily brought to that position before being rescued so many years later. But we do know that Sutzkever, in composing it, had a direct logic to guide readers along in the experience of the ghetto Jew at that moment in extremis. And the fact that we now have this not only as a photograph manuscript, but in 3 different languages where we can look at the original, look at amazing Yiddish print editions, look at how it's translated into English, and then also look at Lithuanian translations, makes this, I think, one of the most exciting books published in the Yiddish field in the past year. I look forward to a conversation.
Thank you. So why don't we begin the conversation? And I leave it to you.
Since I just spoke, I'm gonna allow my Lithuanian.
All right. I will ask a question, and maybe we can get started with that to Minister Kvietkauskas. What were the biggest difficulties that you found in translating from Yiddish into Lithuanian? And I don't mean simply word by word, but also trying to establish the context and the aura of this work.
Translating Sutzkever's poetry is always a challenge because it is really it has a crystalline form. It has a music. Its metrics and rhyme are very precise kind of poetic art. And of course, the main wonder is that such a precise poetry was written in the ghetto, with all its music, with all its metaphors, with all its paradoxes. And this is not a rhetoric of resistance. It's not a consolation. It's a true poetry, with paradoxes, with provocation, with bitterness, as Justin just told. A very bitter criticism of the ghetto community itself. So it's really sharp, provoking, and also, and well, while translating, I think the translation is accompanied by a kind of shiver. By a kind of existential shiver, because I always remember words by Sutzkever when he spoke about the angel of poetry, who guarded him against death in the times of Holocaust, and he believed that true words, true poetry, really good poetry, can save him from death. And now we have those same words that were written there. The words that he believed had power to conquer death. And when Justin Cammy spoke about the logic, the internal logic of this collection, we can really notice that it starts from death, the death of Jacob Gerstein, a very famous ghetto figure, and it leads the reader towards a victory over death, when death is conquered by beauty. So this shiver, translating this kind of poetry was the main context. I felt the most important context I felt during this process, and it was really very touching and very important, not only for me, not only as for translator, but also philosophically and existentially.
A follow-up question. How much Yiddish poetry has been translated into Lithuanian, and how much Lithuanian poetry has been translated into Yiddish?
Thank you. Well, it's a good question. Of course, now we still have few translations directly from Yiddish language, but during the last several years, the number is increasing. And we have new young translators joining this field, translators that have good command both of Yiddish and Hebrew. And in general, the number of translations of Jewish literature in Lithuania is increasing. Yiddish is, of course, is a special case. Translations from Lithuanian poetry into Yiddish, well, that's the most difficult part of the question. I don't quite remember any recent examples. But maybe this could serve as an encouragement. However, Lithuanian texts or articles are being translated into Yiddish. Articles about essays about Yiddish literature, and we have a very nice renaissance of Yiddish publishing in Lithuania. This is one of these examples, and the book is published in 3 languages, including Yiddish. Another example is a diary by Itzhak Rudashevsky, which I translated into Lithuanian, and 2 years ago it was published in a bilingual edition, both Yiddish and Lithuanian. So this is also a very important task for us to do, to keep the Yiddish language alive, to keep this famous tradition of publishing in Vilnius alive.
May I add to that? May I add to that?
Of course.
I didn't mention in my introductory remarks that the book of poetry by Sutzkever is the 4th in the series. We continue to publish our discoveries and continue to do it with YIVO. And our next project will be also trilingual edition of another genre of Jewish document. It will be not a poetry book, but will be an autobiography of a young girl of Bebe Epstein, whom you could acquaint already by through the virtual museum of YIVO. But I must promise that our book will not be the same. It will be something different, and we collaborate on that project as we speak.
Yes, and we're delighted to be doing so. Thank you, Lara. Lara, why don't you talk a little bit about the challenges that you have faced, and they have been many. I'll never forget when I asked you when we were first getting underway of the, I can't remember what it was, 170,000 pages of documents that were currently being processed, how many required urgent conservation, and you said, in your opinion, at least 65,000. This has been a monumental task. We are so grateful to the conservators and those young people in Lithuania, I think most of whom are not Jewish, who have been also engaged in working on this project. But what were some of your challenges?
Are you asking now about the book itself or the collection of the recovered documents?
Both things. I think people might be interested in just hearing your views of how we have really brought this project to the point at which we're actually publishing this book. It's an extraordinary accomplishment, really, and you deserve so much of the credit.
Thank you. You already mentioned that it is a really teamwork. And what I want to point out, what wasn't a challenge, the selection. When we saw that thing, that manuscript, and I said there were several, these 10 poems, the laconicity of that, the statement of the very title given by Sutzkever, also the state of the manuscript, it didn't need much conserving, and that's why I think I know where was it hidden? I think it was a part of the collection of the shortly functioned post-war Jewish museum in Vilnius that Sutzkever, of course, was very much instrumental in establishing. But speaking of, so the selection that at that point was very obvious. And also we thought immediately about this series. So how do you begin a series? Of course, with a statement, and it was a statement. But speaking about real challenges, one was mentioned already by you directly, how to put that into context. For me, after many years of teaching, of course, at the university, one of the main challenges is also always an educational challenge. And here we couldn't do anything. We couldn't put the manuscript, present the manuscript in other way than it is. And we couldn't do anything. We should preserve it as it was. And of course, here two introductory articles by Mindaugas, Kvietkauskas, and David Fishman served the that function of putting things into the context. But also, for me, a very fact that Yiddish text is now available in Lithuanian. Of course, English is important, but for that text to be available in Lithuanian after so many years, and for it being a testament of Holocaust, which not a monograph, which is not an article, which is not a research, but the raw word of poetry itself. This was the challenge I was very, very eager to overcome, and all that teamwork, I think, resulted in just that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can I add a word in there to that?
Please.
Lara was very, very generous a couple of years ago in welcoming students from Smith College to the library, and in showing us not only this document, but a series of other documents that are in the collection. And I think I can't emphasize how important it is that Yiddish and Hebrew documents now exist in Lithuania in this collection in order to expand not only our own knowledge, but the knowledge of a sort of democratic Lithuania in the 21st century of its own literary and cultural heritage. The fact that these documents are there and that scholars and students can go see them and make appointments to look at them means that in the same way it took many, many decades for American literature to expand beyond certain borders, so too will now Lithuanian literature expand to include writers like Avrom Sutzkever, not as necessarily Yiddish writers or Jewish writers, but as writers who are core to Lithuanian experience and memory. And the fact that the library collaborated with YIVO in producing this across the oceans is a remarkable achievement of being able to bridge not only various histories, but also bring literature to a new generation of Lithuanian readers.
We have some questions from people who are watching this, and I thought maybe this would be a good time to share these questions with the panel. One of them is to Professor Cammy. Where is your Yiddish from?
Well,
where and with whom do Lithuanian students learn Yiddish today, which perhaps Lara can answer?
So my Yiddish is not from my family. My Yiddish is learned in graduate school. I studied it both at Harvard and then at YIVO, and then at the Oxford program that later became the Vilnius Yiddish program. And now I'm proud to be associated as a teacher with both the Steiner Yiddish program at the Yiddish Book Center and at the Naomi Praver-Kadar International Yiddish program at Tel Aviv University. And we have students from Lithuania who attend all of those institutions.
Mm-hmm. I can say, Lara, before you answer, I can say that every year we have young people from Lithuania coming to YIVO to study in our summer program, and from time to time to work in our archives. So there is a stream of young people coming and learning, which is a wonderful thing. But Lara, would you like to add to that? I know you have some anecdotes of your own about the class that you were going to teach. And you insisted that everybody learn Yiddish and Hebrew for this class.
I would not, maybe not now, it's not about me, but I would like to say that it's really a pity that now Lithuanian students has, I believe temporarily, no possibility to learn Yiddish in Vilnius summer program. But during all those years the program existed, the main body of students, although it was an international program, I would say the main body of students were from Lithuania. And as you noted already, Justin and Jonathan, they also try to go abroad, as in his own time Mindaugas Kvietkauskas did when there was no summer program in Yiddish in Vilnius. What I want to say is, you mentioned, Jonathan, that many of those young people who are part of various programs and projects in preserving Jewish documentary heritage are not Jewish. Like Ona Shimaite wasn't Jewish. Of course, Ona Shimaite didn't know Yiddish, but those young people, they know that the only key, the main key, at least to the Jewish heritage, is a language, be it Hebrew or Yiddish, or better still both. And they do make efforts. And what I wanted to underline here is motivation, not only abilities, not only interest, but the motivation. And I think the core of that motivation is a very new and modern consciousness of modern Lithuanian youth that do understand that the Jewish culture and Jewish history is not something specific or separate or exotic. It is just an integral part of their own consciousness and their own knowledge of history. And after that, Yiddish and Hebrew and the amazing letters are not so difficult as they are if you only see in that just another language. It is something very much more. And I'm proud to say that every colleague at the Judaica Research Center at the National Library came to work with one or both languages. And I'm so happy they are young people and they have so much in front of them. I just believe in them, and I'm very happy that we can collaborate in all those projects.
It's a very hopeful message, and I think a hopeful reality. That we, with our project, we through our relations, we through our international collaboration are trying to amplify and to make even stronger. And I think possibly what you just said, Lara, answers another question, a thorny question. But maybe someone has something else to add to it, which is, how did it come that Lithuanians got interested in Jewish literature after their behavior during the Second World War? And obviously, this is something on the minds of many, many Jewish people around the world. And I wonder, maybe Minister Kvietkauskas, whether you would like to perhaps even talk about your own experience.
Jewish literature is one of the strongest sources of empathy that helps us to understand this tragedy as a tragedy of our own society. Not just a Jewish tragedy, but a tragedy of Lithuania. And to admit the guilt and the crimes, to admit them openly. So it's not just an interest in literature, it's also a process of recognition, conscious recognition, of learning, of building a Lithuanian identity on democratic and European and pro-Western fundaments. So translating of Yiddish literature also helps our society in this transition. And of course, the treasure, the recognition of that treasure that was created in Lithuania by so many writers, by so many artists, also helps to expand our thinking. I feel really great importance, and it gives me much. It gives me a strong impetus while translating the literature, Yiddish literature, understanding that this is a larger process of a change of our mentality. One more thing I want just to mention, I saw in the comments, in the coming comments, that Thera Bramson was mentioned. Thera Bramson was a great bibliographer with whom I also learned reading and analyzing Yiddish literature. So she was also one of my teachers that led me into this world of literature and Yiddish book publishing. So thank you so much for mentioning Thera Bramson here.
And from me as well, because Thera Bramson was for many years my supervisor at the National Library, and he was also a person due to whom my Yiddish came alive. I do not speak Yiddish till that day, but I understand every word of that because Thera spoke it to her guests and later on to me. And she didn't check, do I understand or not? But in the end, the Yiddish of my grandmother came to me back through Thera Bramson. And I'm very, very grateful also to person or persons who recalled her in that conversation.
Wonderful. Justin, I wonder if you have any thoughts about the relationship between Jewish and Lithuanian culture in Lithuania today. What is it like being a scholar, going back and forth? And you know, my guess is that you've had to think about these things quite a bit, as I have at the YIVO Institute.
I have, and as some of the questions in the chat suggest, it's not always an easy process. But I first went to Lithuania, I believe, in 1994. So things were very different then. Access to the archives were different. Many of these materials were still kept really hidden away in the church and were not accessible to scholars. It was difficult to get around or to be able to speak to people. The change between 1994 and today is stunning, in the sense that now there's not only an ability to and an encouragement for scholars to come and use these resources, but genuine interest on the part of young Lithuanians in the material. And this isn't only a Lithuanian process. I mean, for my position as being part of Yiddish programs and teaching, there's tremendous interest among students in Eastern Europe, many of whom are not Jewish, in learning Yiddish and in learning about Eastern European Jewish history, precisely because this is part of an awakening of their own history. And it is very much encouraging to know that Lithuania is led by a minister of culture who understands the relationship and the power, the relationship between historical memory and not being willing to stand up to those who perhaps would overlook some of the darker sides of that history, but also to recognize that in art, there are ways to bring peoples together, and that at some point now in our histories, there are ways that we can really generate a new excitement for what the possibility is of this cultural exchange. And I mean, that is what comparative literature scholars do. So a year and a half ago, there was a conference hosted in Vilnius in Lithuania that the minister and Lara both attended. It took place at the university, which had not in the 1930s been necessarily the safest or most welcome place for Jewish students. And the possibility to now have a conference there and at the National Library, I think, is an opportunity to turn a new page. But all of us who work in this field, I know you, Jonathan, and certainly my colleagues in Lithuania know that these are contentious issues, and we have to be respectful and be willing to listen to people. Many of these, some of these documents, not all, but some of these documents belonged to pre-war Jewish institutions, including the YIVO. And there will be those who will argue that those documents should not be in Lithuania. It's not up to me as a scholar necessarily to weigh in on these larger questions, other than to say that the fact that Lithuanian institutions and a Jewish institution are cooperating and making these documents and archives accessible, that's what archives are for. They're to be used. And I think that it's incredibly important that we have rich archives both in the United States, but also in Lithuania, so that Lithuania recognizes and can come into direct contact with the sources of its history, including its own, in some cases, participation in the eradication of that culture. So these are not easy questions to navigate, but it reminds me of when I went to Cuba a few years ago and visited the Cuban Jewish community and recognized that none of the books, the Yiddish books produced in Cuba with a Havana imprint existed any longer in Cuba. They'd all been sent away to libraries or to institutions abroad because there were no more Yiddish readers. And I thought, what a loss to Cuban history, because at some point Cuba will be free. And when that happens, wouldn't it be wonderful if materials that were produced by the Jewish communities in Cuba were still in Cuba and could be accessed by young Cuban scholars? So these are, ongoing issues, but it's an exciting moment.
Yes, I agree. It is an exciting moment. It's very exciting to see this happening, unfolding. The creation of the Judaica Center at the National Library seems to me also a very significant statement by the library, by a national institution. But I am advised that unfortunately we have room for just one more question. But I will say that we have two questions that I have to ask. One of them I'm asking Alex and Jane, which is, how does one of our viewers share this event with friends? So if that information can be made available, I think various people will be grateful. The other is, and this is to Lara, how do people get a hold of the book? How do they buy it? I presume that we will have copies at YIVO in due course that can be purchased, but until COVID is over, I think it's going to be difficult for that to be arranged. But in the meantime, where are the books?
Yeah, of course, sadly, in Lithuania, the situation is very similar. Now the library is almost closed, but it is almost. The level of the library where you can change books is active, and it is the same level where the library bookshop is positioned. So you can acquire a book now physically in Lithuania when you come to the National Library, and bookshops now are also opened, if I'm not mistaken. The bookshops are active, and some of the a part of the publication is there. And also there is a possibility to buy the book online. I believe when you address the site of the National Library. Of course, I'm sure that if we could do that, the YIVO will be able to do the same. And I just believe that after the session, there will be more people willing to acquire the book.
Right. So I have just one announcement that I would like to make before we break. First of all, thank you to everyone who has participated. We've had many comments expressing appreciation for this moving and I think very informative discussion. That's the first thing. The second thing is that for those who are interested in seeing, now there is nothing that substitutes for touching, as Justin was saying. But if you are interested in seeing the documents that have been discovered in Lithuania, that have been recently digitized in Lithuania, and also, by the way, in New York, you can do so by visiting the YIVO website and logging on to the Edward Blank YIVO Online Collections Project. And I am very proud to say that the entirety of the project is due to be finished December 2021. So about a year from now, everything will be done.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this excellent conversation and for excellent collaboration. I'm really grateful, and it's really wonderful to have this renewed cooperation between YIVO and Vilnius.
Yeah, and sincere thanks from me as well.
Thank you. And Justin, thank you so much for your very insightful commentary. All right, everyone. Goodbye. Be safe.